Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Mind Your Money webinar. These webinars are proudly brought to you by your Money Life Coach. I am your host, Barbara Mandel. Today, we are going to talk a bit about the money mistakes of 2020. Now, I wonder if you know how I know that some people made financial mistakes. The cool thing is we've got data to prove it, and I just love analyzing these data sets, and I'm going to go through them today, showing you how I know the mistakes that people have made. We are also then going to look at some economic stats, and we're also going to look at what impact this pandemic really had. We're also going to discuss how our behavior caused many of the mistakes that we have made. So let's have a look at what happened in 2020. It was a particularly unfamiliar, challenging, strange, and difficult time for most people. That included our economy. And the reason I want to start off by looking at some of the stats of the economy is it has such a profound and direct impact on how we manage our finances and our ability to do more with our finances. So if we have a look at I'm going to look at it as the individuals, as business, what happened in the economy as a whole, and then we're going to spend some time chatting about what all this really means. So if we look at salaries, now salaries composes of our disposable income. So that means that's money that we can save, invest, spend, put back into the economy. That has decreased with as much as 12.1% year on year in August 2020. So, meaning in August 2019, we were 12.1% better off in terms of the pool of money. In the first 3 months of this year, pension funds, the value thereof, declined by 400 billion rands. 35.1% of employers decreased working time during the pandemic, and 25.8% of employers temporarily laid off employees. If we look at business as a whole, turnover decreased significantly. Only 30% of businesses were confident that they had sufficient resources to continue their operations throughout the pandemic. 54.9% of businesses indicated that they can survive only between 1 and 3 months with no turnover. Our repo rate is at a record low of 3.5%. This year alone, our repo rate was reduced 6 times by the Reserve Bank. Our current CPI is 3.2%. Now, CPI is Consumer Price Index, so in other words, inflation. So prices aren't going up as much, which is good and bad news because it means the economy is not moving right. Which brings us to the next one, the GDP. GDP declined with 17.5% in quarter 2 and 6% in quarter 3. Our employment rate, so that's the active working South Africans, is sitting at 37.5% of our population. The worrying number for me is people who are still looking for work but unable to find work is sitting at 30.8%. Let that sink in. So the amount of people currently working in South Africa is not much more than the current people looking for work. So in order for us to reduce unemployment and find all those people's jobs, we have to double the amount of jobs we have available in South Africa for people. If we have a look at retail sales, that decreased by 49.9% in April. So we know that when level 5 was in place, was the hard lockdown, but that's the effect of the hard lockdown. In October, it still hasn't recovered yet, and we're still sitting at a negative 1.8%. Our household savings ratio tells a bit of a better story. In January, we started off with a negative 0.5%, and we're currently sitting at 0.1%. So that's telling me that this pandemic has taught us something, and we'll get to that in a bit. If we look at the JSE movement, and I just want to run you through what happened on the JSE, give you sort of an idea, and then we'll go into it because I think that was mistake number one that people made. So when we started off the year, the JSE was at about 57 odd points, 57 odd thousand points. In March, now remember, the 19th of March, hard lockdown weren't even in place yet. That only started on the 27th of March. That was our low for the year at 37,000 points. That's all because of this pandemic. If we look at it where it was at the 3rd of December, we're sitting higher than what we were in January. So let that sink in because you're going to have to remember this when we get to mistake number one. Another thing that is really moved around a lot this year is the rand dollar exchange rate, because that determines our fuel price, it determines cost of imports, it determines the cost of our borrowings. There's so many things that is dependent on the rand dollar exchange rate, so I've focused only on that one. And if you look at the rand dollar exchange rate, we started the year off at 13.56 to the dollar. The 24th of April, right in the middle of this pandemic, in South Africa, we were sitting at 19 rand to the dollar. Right now, we're sitting back at 15 rand to the dollar. So I think what this picture really sketches for us is the amount of uncertainty, the amount of change that has happened during this year. So many people have started working from home. What impact will that have on properties and office space and machinery? And there's so many things that is affected by decisions like that. We can see from this economic picture, if we look at our credit rating, for all intents and purposes, we junk status, and it might not be our market still performing, but it limits the people who can invest in South Africa. And I'm one of those people that believes in the South African dream, so we must continue to do so. So let's have a look at those 5 money mistakes. When I started investigating the money mistakes for 2020, there weren't really any surprises. Withdrawing from investments, not having adequate saving, taking on too much credit, spending too much too soon, and defaulting on debt sounds like a pretty average year. Yet, it was a confusing one. Let's dive into each one individually so I can explain why I classified it as a money mistake in 2020. So, money mistake number one is not a new mistake to financial services professionals. It is definitely not a new mistake to investors. It speaks to investor behavior. It speaks to us as human beings. We try and protect what's ours. It's one of our basic needs. But how could we have avoided mistake number one? So let's first look at what was mistake number one. On the screen right now is the performance chart of the JSE All Share Index from January this year until December. If you look at where we started in January, it was just close to 0%. Okay? That's your baseline. We then had a significant decrease of over 30%. Now, the problem is, as the markets decreased, people got fear, especially with COVID. That did add an additional layer of fear, and they disinvested from the market. And then what happened is the market started picking up. So if you were willing to wait out just 1 year, just 1 year in the risk in the market, look what would have happened. your investment would have climbed. You would have had growth of just over 5.5%. But because you withdrew on the downside, or what we call a bear market, you didn't get the upside, or what we call a bull market. So this is money mistake number one. So how could you have avoided it? Well, you could have just simply listened to the advice. If you've got a professional financial planner, financial advisor that is assisting you, you could have just listened to their advice and leave your money invested where it were. You would have most likely made a gain on that investment for the year. Money mistake was money mistake number one was easy to avoid. However, it took serious guts. It takes serious guts when things are crumbling down. We always teach our children, when someone jumps in a fire, don't jump after them because that might harm you. So it's the same here. The market is falling. Do you fall with it? Yes. It's difficult for us because it goes against our intrinsic values. We want to protect what is ours, but yet we have to outlive that dip and get the returns. Understanding how the markets run is very important. Imagine we only had a flat market. What would the point of investing be? What would be the point if we never had any reducing market values in order to get the gains again? And don't try and time the market. That is the biggest mistake anyone could make. Because even though, yeah, you could have potentially try to withdraw your money somewhere down the line, let's say beginning of March when it was still relatively high, and then reinvest it. But the problem with that, it triggers things like capital gains tax. You don't know where exactly down this line are you going to invest. You're going to take a chance. And let's say you see, okay, by the middle of March, well, 1st of March, I've more or less got a level. So mid-May, I reinvested. You probably didn't gain anything if you take your taxes into account. So that's why it's very important for us to stay in the market. Markets are long-term solutions. They're not for your short-term solutions. They're not for the deposit you want to save for the house you want to buy next year. They're not for the car you want to buy next year. They are not for the expenses or the things you want to do in the near future. Markets are for the long term. It's for your retirement savings. It's for your kids' education when they still have a couple of years to go. That's why we have to stay invested in the market, get the gains, and next year the same most probably will happen. We might not have such a big decrease, but stay invested. Have that plan. Make sure that you talk to a professional. And if you don't know if the person you are talking to is a professional, reach out to me. I've got a network of professionals that I can refer you to. It's people I trust. It's people that I know are doing the right thing. Reach out to me. The invitation is there. Money mistake number two is one so often made. As South Africans, we tend to spend more than what we save. In actual fact, we are so much indebted that there's no room for saving. Saving in South Africa for most people means paying off your debt. So, how can I say that not having adequate savings is mistake number two? So, let's start with in 2018, we built up a pretty great reputation towards the end of 2017, 2018, where we had a bit of savings. Then came 2019 and we spent. There was zero savings. And then came 2020, July, in the middle of the pandemic. South Africans managed to save. Let that sink in for a minute. It's because inherently we know what to do. Inherently, we understand that during the pandemic, I will need money. And what if this pandemic continues? We will find ways to save. It's in our core. We know it's the right thing to do. And as human beings, we often know what the right thing is to do. Maybe subconsciously, but you will know. And the problem is that unless you change the behavior, the things that you're accustomed to, the habits that you have formed, you're not really going to change your lifestyle. It takes a pandemic to get us to wake up and realize that we should have saved more. The problem with this, especially why I call it mistake number two is because before the pandemic, we didn't have any savings to carry us through the pandemic. And it slots in directly to money mistake number three, which we'll get to in a few seconds. But I just want to highlight the importance of this. So while we had a relatively lucky year last night, we had state capture, there's all the political drama, we were downgraded a couple of times. So maybe we were depressed, but we weren't as depressed as what we were in the pandemic. The pandemic brought back the fear of losing our income, losing our lifestyle, losing our habitual things that we do. And look what happened to our savings. It motivated us to plan for tomorrow. And when we go through your financial plan, and as a financial planner, I always used to say to my clients, let's make some sort of provision. I know it's difficult, but it's amazing how quickly small changes in your habit that are consistent, that is the big key. It does not help me saying for a week, this is the changes I'm going to make, and then for the next 3 weeks, I don't do it, because then that whole plan falls flat. So it's the changes that I make consistently that will lead me to increase my savings ratio. So if you're struggling to save, I urge you, get in touch with me. Let's put together a plan where I can help you change those habits. I can help you get to a point where you feel in control. I can help you to manage and master your personal savings ratio. I won't necessarily change your entire lifestyle. It depends on your situation. But this is so crucial. And I just think if we could get this right during a pandemic, why didn't we do it the previous year? Look how much we spent in December last year and January this year. Have a look at that. We did not save nearly enough. And the scary thing is, by December last year, we sort of knew a pandemic was coming. We didn't know the scale and the effect of it, granted, but we knew something was coming. Yet, it took a couple of months for us to realize, we need to increase our savings. So now let's have a look at why I say mistake number two and mistake number three is interlinked. Look what happened to our debt. This is the chart on the screen is the private sector debt in South Africa. Look what happened. We had a high December last year. It's festive season. January, we need to get through the month. What happened in February? We needed to recover from January. And then the pandemic hit. And the worst is by March, the total March figure, we didn't even know that we're going to have a hard lockdown. We didn't know that. Our hard lockdown only came towards the end of March, yet March was our highest debt figure. From April on, it steadily declined, and there could be various reasons for it. I think affordability has got something to do with this. Restructuring some of the debt has got something to do with this. But besides all that factors, this is how we had to carry ourselves through a pandemic with such high increase in our debts because we didn't save. So the habit of us taking on debt, in most instances, not really understanding the long-term impact of that debt, and often not questioning the interest rates we pay, how it's structured, what additional fees there are, and our ability to repay that debt on time or even earlier, has caused us to have to go into more debt during a pandemic where we don't know what's happening to our income. Can you see the problem there? The big key to any financial success story, any company, is you have to get in more than what you give out. So the more debt you take on, the quicker your ship's going to sink. The quicker you're going to start feeling water aboard. And you are going to start feeling panicky because how am I going to get this water out? There's a hole in the ship somewhere. You need to find that hole and fix it. Because if you can't find that hole and fix your ship, you've got a problem. And the increased level of debt has exactly done that. It has highlighted to us that our poor savings culture, our high spending culture, which we'll also get to just now, we have to start managing our debt better. We have to reconsider. Most people nowadays, and here I blame the financial institutions to a point, because you get to a point where you're starting to pay off capital instead of interest, or majority of your debt repayment goes towards interest, capital and not interest, and then you take out a consolidation loan to reduce your monthly installments, and all you're basically doing is re-extending your debt and starting to pay interest from the get-go again. Why? I often ask myself, how can people just go into consolidation loan after consolidation loan after consolidation loan? Look, there is a place for it. When your circumstances have changed and you need to consider it, there is always room for it. However, are we realizing that this recycling of debt basically keeps us in the same position? And 90% of the time, that debt is not even funding anything worthwhile. That debt is funding our lifestyle and our habits, the things we need to change if we want to be less financially stressed. If you want to be in a position where you can feel in control of your finances. And being in control of your finances doesn't mean you don't have any debt. It also doesn't mean that you just have car and household debt or credit card debt. Being in control is to comfortably be able to pay your debts. Being in control is to comfortably allow you to make sure that you've got the right amount of debt versus your income and what you spend it on. Some things might be important to you, and you'll always need to make provision for that. And if you didn't make provision for it early enough, yes, you will have to go into debt. But the key remains that you need to manage it on a sustainable way, that you need to consistently try to reduce that debt and not be stuck in the hands of debt forever. Money mistake number 4 clearly indicates exactly what I said money mistake number 3 did. We increased our debt, and what happened? Our spending increased. Instead of managing and trying to reduce our monthly expenses and trying to cope throughout this pandemic, we saved a bit more, we added a bit more debt, but look at our spending. Now, granted, from April to May was a big jump because, yes, there was level 5 lockdown and that had a significant impact, and then moving back to level 4 and 3. But I do want you to think cautiously about that difference in spending. What did you spend money on after lockdown? Was it necessary? Did it help? Have you got something to show for it? Have you got memories that you can share with it? Or is it needless things or needless information that you now have that if you had a choice, you would rather not? And if you haven't listened to our podcast on impulse decision making, I urge you to do so because it contains a really nice way for you to help manage that impulse decision. Because if I look at this, it clearly shows to me that there was some impulse because people wanted to be free again. They wanted to be in charge again. And lockdown is something we've never really experienced. So you are going to act differently. It's human nature. But I want to urge you to make sure that your spending habits does not necessarily end up in having more debt, being unable to control your finances, feeling powerless for something you might not even really like or really need, something you wanted and now don't even want it anymore. So we need to start thinking about how we spend our money. And that's money mistake number 4 for me. We started spending too quickly. We saved a bit. We got into more debt. And we started spending too quickly. Spending is not necessarily also a bad thing because it does help the economy generate. But the problem is if we aren't spending it on things of value, then the value chain is broken and you can't really, in your personal circumstances, grow from that. So it's another one to think about. That's money mistake number 4. So what is money mistake number 5? Okay. The problem is because we now have less income. Remember, we had a decrease in net salary. We've got an increase in spending, an increase in the amount of debt. What inevitably happens, we are not able to service that debt. And you can see here that the average South African is becoming more and more under pressure of servicing that debt. And that's that debt recycling that I just spoke about a few minutes ago. We are quickly to recycle debt just to help us through this month and maintain our living standard and maintain the things that might or might not really matter to us. Look at how significantly we jumped in quarter 2 of 2020. This is the number of days that debt has been outstanding. The average number of days that a South African person who is creditly active is owing on their accounts is more than 2 months. That means you need to get, for lack of a better word, double your bonus just to catch up on your debts. You're starting to feel the pressure. It negatively impacts your credit record. Negatively impacting your credit record is not necessarily the end all and be all, because you can rebuild it. You can change it. But what does this say about our economy? What does this say about us as human beings and where we're going? How does this allow us to move forward and create growth and create change? How does not paying our debts quicker allow us to build wealth? Because remember, while you are not paying that installment that was due, you're not getting any interest free from it. You are paying more interest on it. There's additional fees to it because now there's a debt collecting process that follows. That's why it's mistake number 5. It's actually by far the second biggest. Mistake number 1 is still my biggest mistake. But not paying your debts on time has got such a lasting effect on your personal financial circumstances. And I want you to, if you are stuck in this position, reach out. Reach out to a professional. Reach out to me. Let's see if we can work out a plan for you to help you get this back under control. Because remember, the sooner we can get this back under control, the sooner we can relieve some of your cash flow so that you can start saving again. So that you don't have to be faced in a position of debt when the next pandemic hits. And it probably will hit. You don't have to face the pandemic, the situation of having to rely on your children to look after you when you retire, or being stuck working for the rest of your life, or being stuck with a SASSA pension. Because let's face it, a SASSA pension does not get you far. So I want you to think very carefully about when you decide there's some really bad habits out there. So here's a couple that I heard. People take from one credit card, pay into the next. Take from that credit card, pay into the next one. Every time there's fees. And the problem is with transfers generally with credit cards. The minute you transfer out of that credit card, you start paying interest and you lose that 55-day interest-free grace period. That's one bad habit. The second bad habit is people have 2 check accounts that I've heard of. And what they do, and please, this is not any means to give you ideas on what to do to dodge your debt. Because remember, the longer you dodge your debt, the longer debt is going to have an impact on your goals, your dreams, what you want to achieve, and you being able to just manage comfortably. People have 2 check accounts and they withdraw all their money so their debit orders don't go off. And they say, that's next month's problem. I saw a joke earlier on Facebook saying, be careful, January's got 4 months, and sometimes it feels to people like that way. Most people, you can see that generally in quarter 1, this figure jumps up because people don't pay their debit orders. And it's a sad reality of the life that we live in is that people aren't able to plan during the year for a period like December, and then come December, we don't have money, so we use what is due for January's debit orders. How do you avoid yourself doing that? Well, my habit is I generally transfer that money for my January debit orders into a savings bucket of my account, and then I've got a scheduled payment back into my account the 1st of January so that all my debit orders goes off and there's no real impact on my financial situation. Because guess what? If you don't see that money, you won't know it's there. And if you don't know it's there, you're not going to want to spend it. So it's little things like this that can change your money habits, that can help you really get in charge of your finances, feel less stressed. Because the problem is, most people start off feeling stressed about money. Then you're stressed at work. Then it starts impacting your performance at work. You don't get the increases, you don't get the bonuses. The bonuses that you hope for will get you out of this debt. And it's all a downward spiral. So then what happens? You recycle that debt in order to be able to afford it. And then 3 years down the line, when you're just starting off, you recycle it again because now you're back under the pressure that you were. It's a downward spiral unless you decide to stop, act, and take charge of your finances. Plan a little better. Be a responsible spender. I'm not saying don't spend. We all have spending money. Otherwise we wouldn't be in a debt crisis. But be responsible about it. Be consistent in saving. If there's any tip I can give you for 2021 is set up those goals. If you're struggling, reach out to someone like me. My sole life mission is to help people. That's why I do these webinars. That's why I've got educational content that I share on my pages, because I want you to be better off. And if I can share my knowledge with the world and someone pay all my bills, well, then I'd be a very happy person. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And I want you to consider what I've said today. And if you've got questions, please reach out. Okay, we can discuss what options you've got. There's so many things that is possible in today's life. There's so many ways in which you can ask for help. I urge you to do so. Make that your mission for 2021, is to finish off better than what you were in 2020. Because isn't that ultimately what we all want to achieve, is to progress in life, to be better than you were last year. Not necessarily just as a person, not necessarily just as your finances, not necessarily just in your job. Overall, it plays a very important part of our emotional psyche, of who we are, what we want to do, and moving forward. We can see from the country, we can take lessons from there. What happens if you continuously spend more than what you earn? You can see what they call as the fiscal cliff, where SARS's revenue dried up because there was no sale of alcohol and tobacco. It had a huge impact, and it will have a huge impact for decades to come. Our grandchildren will be paying off the debt that South Africa has today because of some not good decisions. I can't think of another way to describe it. But that's exactly where we are. Ladies and gentlemen, please reach out. Contact details on the screen. Let us know how we can help. Be the change you want to see in the world. My message to you today is just be better than you were last year. Make that your sole mission and goal for 2021. Thank you very much for listening.